Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder, and we're going to be talking about the Billy Meier case. Today, the title of the program is How the Might Over Oneself and Over One's Destiny Can Be Won. And I'm going to be covering, at least at the beginning of the show, a little section in the Psyche, in the book The Psyche, that talks about this. I thought it was noteworthy today while I was looking at it. I hope no one tries to think that I'm trying to pass myself off as any kind of expert at all. I share this material because I think it's of value, and it's been very helpful for me. I don't claim to be the world's number one expert on this information. I certainly also, the real key is being able to apply it, and sometimes applying it is a real challenge. But I thought I would say that just here at the beginning of the show. If anyone's never heard of Edward Albert Meier, and before I start, let me tell everyone, if you go to exopoliticsohio.us, you can see the website for the show, exopoliticsohio.us. If you just Google Ohio Exopolitics, you will be able to find the website. That you'll see Blog Talk Ohio Exopolitics, and you'll see Ohio or exopoliticsohio.us. And the reason I say there is I'm putting some links up on that first page. If you press the button that says, let me take a look here. It says YouTube. Then you'll be able to see some of the shows that I've been doing over Blog Talk for the longest time, now available on YouTube. And Stephen Woods has been doing a fantastic job of putting images to these shows. So I'm humbled. I'm very pleased. These images really capture the meaning of this information in many ways. And let me at least go over who Billy Meier is for those of you who maybe are new to the show. And even if you're not new to the show, sometimes it's kind of interesting to go back over this. Back in 1941, on the 3rd of February, in northern Switzerland, in an area called Bulak, Switzerland, near a smaller village, I guess you would say, called Niederflachs, near the Eichenmoser and Bruder Mountains, and there were wide forests there and extensive meadows and stuff. Billy, one evening, he opened up he crawled out a lower window in his bedroom, and he looked up at a beautiful starry sky. And he's this 4-year-old boy. It's, I think, in 1941. And he's looking up at this beautiful starry sky, and he's overwhelmed. And he gets this information. And from the Meier information, it tells us he was impulsed by what are called the storage banks. There's storage banks of information at the universe level, at the solar system level, and at the planetary level. I don't know which one of these Speicherbanks, as they're called in the German, was giving him, or that he was picking up on this information all the time. There are like signals that come out of these storage banks. And if you have the right kind of frame of mind, the right sensitivity, you can kind of know things and kind of be inspired. And this young boy, about 3 a.m. one morning on a mild night in May in 1941, he went outside and he sat down on this bench, and he looked up at a beautiful starry night, and he heard a voice in his head, literally, which I think was his own spirit form, is my speculation, that his spirit form, which is about 9.6 billion years old, his material consciousness was about 4 years old at this time. And he was getting impulses from the storage banks as well as from his own spirit. And he said, my life is made out of the love of creation. And shortly after that, he heard himself say, these words formed on his lips, he said, since ancient times, you have lived among the stars. And Billy suddenly knew who he was and what his mission on the earth, this earth was. And then he talks about these impulses. Impulses that came from somewhere, he said. Now later he recognized the impulses coming from the storage banks. And he started to get these good memories from previous lives. And they showed him the way he had to go in his life. And he said something profound after this. I still don't know exactly what it means. He said, thus I suddenly knew what space and time signify concerning the evolution of human beings and all things. And then he said something else which is equally profound. He said, I recognize that the light which the stars emitted was a light in the visible spectrum. However, the light of true love remained invisible, creational, and for all great time. And indeed the beaming stars were there, which stirred in me an unfamiliar longing for the very distant and faraway worlds. This is, I think, is coming from Billy's spirit form again, who has lived in other galaxies, in other solar systems, in ancient times. And again, he knew suddenly who he was, and also he said how I am and what my mission on this earth was. And at this very young age, he said some really, really profound things about creation. He said, everything which exists in the whole universe is a manifestation of the might and the infinite true love of the mighty universal consciousness, simply called creation. Our universe, which the Meyer Information calls the Dern universe, was created 46 trillion years ago. It's a brand new universe in many respects, even though it's 46 trillion years old. It's in the first stage of its eons-long evolution. And one of the reasons I say that is because there's material in this universe, and that's only true of universes in the first stage of their evolvement. They produce stars and galaxies and solar systems, and that always seems kind of sad to me because I'm used to coarse material. It's what I know, and I can't imagine being what they call fine material only. So this is just my own lack of evolution probably, which there's plenty of lack of evolution there. The more I learn. That's one thing that's amazing about this material. The more you learn about it and you see how profound and advanced it is, the more you look at yourself and say, wow, do I ever have some work to do? So, in the book The Psyche, which is one of Billy's books, Billy has written about 50 books, and these books are very, very interesting. They teach us a lot of things about very, very important stuff. The Psyche is kind of the beginning of these three important books which are related. The Psyche, The Way to Live, and The Might of Thoughts. And here on page 62 is kind of an introduction for the book The Might of Thoughts. And it said here, the presented teaching is the teaching of the absolute causes and effects, the logic of the laws of nature and of the real life. if the causes are acted upon logically and according to the laws of nature, consciously and determinedly, the effects will also be in the same manner. The presented teaching marks and conveys the way how the might over oneself and over one's destiny can be won. And I think that's one of the big challenges, is because once you control your thoughts, once you do what you want to do, rather than behaving compulsively or being led by our emotions, once you can truly do what you want to do and spend your time doing what is productive in terms of time and effort, then that gives you greater satisfaction, certainly. For the fulfillment of this teaching, it is the absolute worst that one thoroughly occupies oneself with it, and that the necessary time is spent for its study. And let me just tell you, if anyone buys any of Billy's books, for example, The Might of Thoughts, and you read it the first time, you spend all this effort to read it the first time, which is what I did, and you realize you got about 5% of the material there, maybe 3%, maybe lower. And I ended up reading it again and then reading it again. And then really what you've got to do to learn this stuff is to go over it extremely slowly, to repeat it to yourself out loud, which is very helpful. And I had to memorize sections. And then it slowly starts to get ingrained. And you'll have personal inner freedom once it starts to get ingrained. So in this little section here, it's going to talk about how this information should be studied. For the fulfillment of the teaching, it is of absolute worth that one thoroughly occupies oneself with it, and that the necessary time is spent for its study, so it is deemed first and foremost to obtain the necessary cognitions in order to be clear about who and what the human being is in reality, upon whom he or she is dependent, and to whom he or she is responsible. Now, one of the things it said here was, the present teaching marks and conveys the way how the might over oneself and over one's destiny can be won. Now, the word might is used, and the might is Macht in the German, and it's a noun, and there's a distinction between might and power. And let me go back to the section in this book that talks about definitions. There's a whole glossary in the back of this book, and here's what it says about might, and it talks about power as well. Power is that which triggers/releases energy. Energy releases power. So power releases energy, and energy releases power. But might is a factor that is ruling, dominating, controlling, something that is above that which is normal. And this is what hit home to me. Might uses power and stands above power. So the might of your thoughts, once you get might over your thoughts and start to control them, and they start to have them to be neutral positive, then those thoughts become very powerful. And that those thoughts then use power. So the might uses power and stands above power. So something to contemplate. I'm going to have to continue to contemplate this. The human being has might over himself, or he doesn't. And the mightiest that exists is the creation, of course. So might uses power. So keep that in mind. Might uses power. Because only a human being who is able to think absolutely clearly, and this is what I really experienced. This is the wonderful part of this. The more you go over this material, the clearer your thoughts become. And that's one of the amazing, important things. is you get the clarity of thought. And because you're not so tormented by your emotions. And it's just hard to put into words. I need to contemplate that, the mindset that changes. I need to contemplate that more. The human being who is able to think absolutely clearly and freely can also act clearly and freely. Furthermore, it is also important to bring forth all necessary practical prerequisites and to eradicate all errors hindering success. Finally, practical guidance for the self-help and for the use by other persons should also still be given due attention. The entire teaching, however, still very much more as its knowledge and its possible applications are unlimited and extend themselves into all areas of human life. Before we can get into the teaching, a few points must be mentioned. Because if someone is eager to achieve a decisive success with the help of the present teaching, then the following instructions must be heeded. This is on page 64 of the Psyche. And I'm not going to go over all of this. Well, I don't know how much of it I'll go over. We'll just see how it flows. But it says here, the teaching is not a book. Therefore, it should not be read as such. So you're not like reading a light novel, I'll tell you that much. And that's true for all of his books. The subdividing of the entire material should be purposed so that only a specific amount of material is being absorbed daily. And that may be one sentence that you are focused on this particular day. One sentence. What might that one sentence be? My consciousness is like a garden. That's one sentence, and you can just contemplate that for the rest of the day. Or one sentence might be, it is in the nature of the thoughts that by their might alone, anything conceivable can be brought to fruition. So you spend a whole day thinking about that. And if I want to go to one that I haven't truly memorized yet, but one or a couple even that we've been talking about lately. For example, one is, whatever the human being intensively thinks about grows in him or her and becomes fact. That's another one. You could take that and memorize it and think about it. Whatever the human being intensively thinks about grows in him or her and becomes fact. And then it goes on to later and talks about that we have environmental influences and personal subliminal desires, and we have uncontrolledness that is always lying in wait, and all these negative sides, and all of these. So there's this struggle between our innermost creational personality and the false self. And the false self wants to penetrate the thoughts and bring control. And along those lines is that which is bad and negative, once created, does not simply disappear. So once you start to think bad thoughts, they don't go away. And let me tell you, it takes a lot of effort to make those thoughts go away. And you have to concentrate on other things. And those negative thoughts, and I think the good ones, this is true too as well, store themselves in the planetary storage banks. And you can consciously or subconsciously pull these negative things out of storage banks, and they can send your thoughts out of control again. And you can do this over many reincarnations. You can do this over multiple lifetimes. If you put bad things in the storage banks, you come back again and you pull the bad things out all over again. So the thoughts are so important. However, this specific amount should be studied in detail and attentively. We're back to how we study this material. Meticulous review is essential. like I said, going over one sentence at a time, contemplate it all day if you have to. My consciousness is like a garden. Or you can take one statement like, I am confident. Billy talks about the importance of confidence. Another thing he talks about is optimism. So you maybe spend the whole day just telling yourself you're optimistic and coming up with the reasons why you're optimistic or why you're confident. You must have a meticulous review of this material. If you just skim over the material, it's really not going to do much for you. Here it says, hurried and superficial reading through does not bring the least success. So you can read 30 pages and then you go back and you think, okay, what did I just read? You'll never be able to absorb 30 pages of the Meyer material in one day. Now, maybe you have days where you go ahead and read that much anyway, but the point is you need to go back over and over this. Billy says the best time for study is early in the morning. I haven't been doing this. I need to get back to that. And you should never study for more than 60 minutes. You know how I always keep this show to 60 minutes. This is interesting. I didn't know, I wasn't because I read this in the book, The Psyche. It's just something that happened. You should not allow yourself to be disturbed or distracted. So then you have to work and arrange, things in your life so you're not distracted. There's family members and pets and whatever distracts you. Let me read this little section here. It says, it is absolutely necessary that each person thinks everything over him/herself and rightly processes the teaching, rightly looks at it and considers it and compares it with reality. Boy, that's one thing to always do. Read something, that which is bad and negative once created does not simply disappear again. Now think about your own thoughts. And think about things the negative thoughts that you repeated over and over again. And how that was a mistake and how you're moving on and you're not going to do that anymore. Only thus can the teaching material be rightly and completely processed. Also, repetitions also belong to the study, meaning that which once has been learned and read should be repeated often. This is something, again, I just stumbled over and started doing. It's not that I really remembered it saying this. This is because only through that can a permanent realization of the learned material be ensured. Here, it is also advantageous when the repetition is conducted aloud. I always do that. And I came across this, and it's something I stumbled over about 3 or 4 years ago. Particularly the information about the love of creation. And I always said that aloud, and I think I talked about this on the last show even. Love is the highest principle in all creation, and through it everything exists in absolute logic. So the first creational natural law of our universe is love. And it's a universal love. It's more of a brotherly love. It's not romantic. Although in our human way, we pursue romantic love or we pursue sexual love. It's just a weakness. Why there's 9 billion people on the planet, or whatever the number is now. We're reproducing so much. It's because, in part, probably, we no longer really focus on what the Meyer material calls effective love. And how does the information, how does it describe effective love? It says, the incredible splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation. So, and this is one of the wonderful things to learn to say aloud. or speak of aloud. And a lot of this material, again, is found in Love Teaching Letter number 27. Love is the highest principle of creation, and through it everything exists in absolute logic. So everything exists through the love of this universal intelligence, which has no real personality. The creation is an amazing thing. It's not a human being. It's not a Wesen. It's more of a Wesenheiten in German, which means it doesn't even in its free will control its own evolution. All of the steps of its evolution are predetermined. They last certain periods of time. But this love of creation is everywhere, because without it, nothing at all would be able to exist. The best way to experience, in my opinion, the love of creation is to be in an area where there are a lot of woods, a lot of trees, where you can see running brooks or lakes, hills, animals. In the summertime is the best. And you will feel the negative ions that are produced by the plant world, and you will, if you're open, if you're a good observer, you can start to sense the radiating love of creation. And when you can start to sense this, it's something called Empfinden in the German, and it's called a fine, sensitive feeling. I don't know if I can even find the Empfinden as it's talked about in the book, The Psyche. The book, The Psyche, for me was my first one of Billy's books. It's the first book that I had read of Billy's, and I had read a lot of the contact reports, studied a lot of the contact reports. But when I got this book, there's a whole another level of learning that you get when you get to his books. And believe me, your mental health depends on you getting his books and learning them. Let me see if I can find Empfinden really quickly. I want to talk about the Gemut. Well, there is something called feeling, and there's a whole, well, maybe we should talk about feelings a little bit, and then maybe we'll stumble across Empfinden and the radiating love of creation. Here it is. Empfinden is referred to as the blocking factor which occupies the important position in the spiritual realm in the Gemut, and maybe we will go back and study the Gemut. The Empfinden is a part of the Gemut. It's called. The Gemut is in your spiritual consciousness. It controls the thoughts and the feeling of the spiritual consciousness. The Gemut has some connection to the universal consciousness through these psychic swinging waves. It's very deep. It's very profound. Let me continue. That means the Empfinden is a spiritual process of the Gemut. So it's not anything that belongs to the physical body. The Empfinden only receives swinging waves which are of a purely spiritual nature, and thus in the spiritual sense of a neutral positive equalized form. The Empfindungen are as manifold as the feelings, except the Empfindungen are simply pure and only neutral positive equalized form. The Empfindung not only influences the entire spiritual mentality block, but it also works across into the material realm. So when you start to sense the radiating love of creation, it affects your material body as well. And again, I don't want to in any way set myself up as some expert or some saintly person in any way. I'm just a regular guy that studied this material. Anyway, directly into the half-material psyche as one of the many basic factors of the feeling origination. Obviously, the competence and energy of the Empfindung also suffices to participate considerably in the spiritual consciousness, as is also the case with the feeling which participates in the life and workings of the material consciousness from out of the half-material realm of the psyche. Now this is very deep stuff, very interesting, and I'll read a little bit more. It says, also in regard to the Empfindung and the Empfinden, a very deep-reaching confusion predominates with the scientists researching this matter. Because in order to reduce everything to a common denominator, they simply equate the Empfindung with the feeling. It is a confusion beyond compare. When one considers the Empfindungen can solely and exclusively occur in the spiritual realm. So the Empfindungen, is related to your spiritual consciousness. The Gemut, thus in the spirit Gemut, and from there goes forth out of the Gemut to function, by which to first influence the half-material realm of the psyche. So what comes through the Gemut in your spiritual consciousness also affects the psyche. And it's a very, very positive thing to allow these impulses and swinging waves to go back and forth. In the material realm, the Empfindung comes to expression through the feeling in a very special form, namely extremely intense sensitivate, thus a highly sensitive, can't pronounce this German word, it begins with an F. At the same time, the sensitivate exhibits an enormous strength and results from the powers of the Confade Empfindungen from the spiritual realm. Thereby, primarily, it is possible for the human being to be of extremely fine feeling and to comprehend things in spheres via this process. I'll just leave it at that. This is something that's only comprehended through the powers of the Spirit. And it's a process that starts to happen when you really, really focus on the love of creation and the beauty of creation. And I'm very blessed to be in a situation to be able to sense this. I think it'd be very, very hard to have the same experience in the middle of a very big and crowded city. You might be able to. I do not know. I haven't tried it and I don't want to. But, so we've been talking about the psyche, talking about the Gemut, and talking about the radiating love of creation. And that's we started in Billy's experience as a young boy growing up in Switzerland, where a 9.6 billion-year-old spirit form starts to influence a 4-year-old boy and teach him the love of creation. And he's looking up again. He's looking up at this beautiful starry night, and he's looking at his hands and his body, and he says he can only vaguely recognize them. He touches his body, and then he hears his voice say again, "My life is made out of the love of creation." And he even says, and I could not explain why I said that, and which power led me to speak these words. And he said a slight shiver came over me, although the night was quite warm. And then I noticed that I also felt peculiar, but not frightened. And I looked up at the stars and recognized that the stars were distant suns in the vast outer space that shone by means of their own power by themselves, even though they were created from the light of the love of creation, as everything is in the whole universe. And again, the words, origins of which I could not decipher. Again, the 9.6 billion-year-old spirit influencing the 4-year-old material consciousness, and the impulses of the storage banks influencing the 4-year-old consciousness. The words which came from my mouth penetrated deeply into me, and in them I recognized that the true source of life is the light of creation love, which in its vitality creates all life and contains within itself all laws and recommendations of the creational order and all information about life and death. Again, remember what it says here. It says everything is created out of the light of love. Does that mean that light is an aspect of love literally? Or is light being used as a metaphor? Or could it be that to an extent light is an aspect of the love of creation? Perhaps there is both a visible and invisible aspect to light. It seems that light plays a role in the creation of all things. And it says in this passage, everything is created out of the light of love. So the one thing to notice is how your thinking profoundly changes when you're contemplating the love of creation. It's exactly the opposite of negative thoughts, which grow wildly and create suffering and confusion. So I thought this might be a good time to study. We've got a guy in the chat room. Hello, null time, I guess, twin null time. Let's get back to some of the stuff in the Might of Thoughts. Just so you know, there's something called an evolution code, which exists in Billy's spiritual teaching texts, but you got to read it in the German to get any of that evolution code. It somehow releases impulses from the storage banks, which reach the reader, just like Billy was getting impulse from the storage banks. That same thing happens to you when you read the German. I struggle to read a little bit of passage now and then again in the German, but I'm very much a beginner when it comes to German. Now, this book is dedicated to the humankind on Earth, and they tell us that we're ill in our consciousness and that we need to find the creational natural way again. And one of our big problems is a lack of independent thinking. And without independent thinking, we cannot evolve the consciousness. And it says here in the beginning of the book, thinking is more and more stunted on our planet because we live in a consumer society where we have the television, the radio, the newspapers, the magazines, and so forth. People become programmed today by the mass media. Thought, true thought, is an idea or opinion produced by thinking in your own mind. Thought is the process of using one's mind to consider something. One of the ways to learn to think independently is to start to think logically. Logic is a system of thinking that doesn't really depend on faith. Aristotle and Socrates were two of the great philosophers that taught us about logic. Guess what? Two of the earlier incarnations of Edward Albert Meyer. And Askett's Explanations Part 5, she says, Askett was Billy's second mentor. I think we talked a little bit about Sloth earlier. If I didn't, I certainly meant to. Billy had 11 years of mentorship from an extraterrestrial human named Sloth, who would land his silvery pear-shaped craft in Bulak, Switzerland. Billy would come out near the ship. Billy would be lifted up into the ship by some sort of technology. Sloth would take Billy high into orbit and then give him the lesson for the day and then eventually bring him back down, and Billy would go on with his life. And when he was 16, he got a new mentor, a woman named Asket from the Tao Universe, and she picked him up the first time on a hill in Switzerland and took him to the Great Pyramid, where they went far below the Giza Plateau into these old cubicle constructions created by some negative extraterrestrials called the Giza Intelligences. So that was Billy's second teacher, Asket. And let me read something that Asket said. She said, "The human," meaning the Earth human, "is still not capable of coping with and fully understanding the truth. And he is not yet mature enough to know his future and to approach it correctly. For that reason, the truth must be rewritten prophetically for him, as in equations, in order to make him think independently, whereby he slowly finds and recognizes the truth." Which I thought was very interesting that Asket said that we have to get prophecy now because we've lost the ability to think independently very well. And all of our might, which is different than power, might uses power, might controls power. All of our might is anchored in our thoughts. So we are the forger of our own fortunes. And Billy goes on to say that even children are included in that statement. He also mentions that pain, suffering, and disadvantage occur because of lack of understanding related to the power of our thoughts. So even children influence their own future. They're the forger of their own fortune. The human being is the forger of their own fortune. We create our own luck, and it depends on our thinking. External circumstances of life depend very much on our thinking. We must be not purely negative or purely positive in our thinking. We must be neutral positive. Therefore, then we have both positive and negative. And they're equalized. And this balanced thinking starts. If you're too positive or too negative, if you try to separate the negative and the positive, you'll have big problems. The negative and the positive are two powers which belong together because they depend on one another. You go into what's called a sartung, or out of control of the good human nature. You are the creator of your own morality, your own character, your own personality. You are the creator of your own psyche, the smith of your entire life circumstances, your environment, your destiny. You are in control of. That's astounding. We have to take a lot of responsibility. Let me read a little something from page 16 here. And the truth reveals that the most enjoyable and richest thing that the human being can desire comes to him or her. The absolute freedom of his or her thoughts, as well as the absolute freedom of the use of might, which emanates from the thoughts. This freedom is a creation-given promise and provides a confidence for the existence and fulfilling of the evolution according to the laws of creation, which are not integrated into any kind of religious or worldly idealization or dogma or other forms of this kind, just as creation itself is not. So basically, your thoughts are incredibly powerful, no matter who you are, even if you don't think you're really smart. It doesn't matter because we grow more intelligent and more powerful over various incarnations, and you can become smarter, in my opinion, in this lifetime by utilizing the clarity and the power of your thoughts. Because it's the purpose and intention of creations for you to evolve. And you will eventually evolve into an Ishwish, a king of wisdom, no matter what lowly state you may be in right now. So let me continue. The individual freedom of the human being's thoughts, which is assigned to him by the laws of creation. These are the laws of creation here. And the mindful use of the thoughts makes him or her a Vazen, which is capable of the conscious evolution, which in addition to that the human being can individually form according to his own choosing and will, according to his own morality, character, entire personality, and according to the state of his or her psyche, as a separate individual unit of power and love, intelligence, knowledge, and wisdom, and as a master of his or her own thoughts and the might of his or her own thoughts. The human being himself or herself holds the key to every conceivable situation in your hand. You hold the key. The key is the might of the thoughts, a regenerative means for change, which is intrinsic to every rational human being, and with the help of which the human beings can make themselves into that which they want to be, just as you wish. That's phenomenal. I'm gonna get myself a little piece of paper and stick it in page 16 and come back to it, because that is phenomenal. The human being is always and in every moment the master of his own situation. And indeed, even when he or she suffers affliction and misery, or when he or she feels weak, ill, and abandoned, through the might of the thoughts, each human being determines his or own state, and indeed, as a rule, via the psyche, which is formed by the might of the thoughts, in a negative or positive, or rather neutral, positive, equalized way. If the human being forms his or her thoughts in a neutral, positive, equalized way, then he or she is raised by their might into unimagined heights and is rewarded with love, harmony, and joy of living, as well as with success and so forth. But if the human being allows himself to fall, and if his or her thoughts become negative and unequalized, then the human being is assailed by weakness, failure, sorrow, disharmony, abasement, fear of life, and reluctance regarding life. Thus, in any case, the human being is always the master of his or her directly existing state, called forth and formed by the might of his or her thoughts. So, in ancient times, we were told that when we make efforts towards things, that we will harvest a result. So one of the things we have to do is clarify our thoughts. This is one of the greatest things I've learned. And if you repeat, I'm confident, I'm optimistic, I'm relaxed, I'm cheerful, I'm enthusiastic, I persevere, I persist, I endure, I am calm, then you start to get clarity in your thoughts, because you have to have a certain frame of mind. And then you have to, if there's something in particular that you're working on right now, think about it, say some things out loud about it, clarify your thoughts on a subject. And that is very valuable, and you'll be more harmonious. So to clarify, we're trying to make a situation less confused and clearly comprehensible. I should probably come up with a scenario. Maybe not this show, but at some show. What it means to really clarify your thoughts. See, when you're clarifying your thoughts, you're removing all confusion. You're creating categories, and you create category A and B and C. And certain information goes in A, and certain information goes in C, certain information goes in the B category. And you can see the clear distinctions. There's no blurring of things. So we're trying to achieve clarity here, clarification of the thoughts. And that happens for me when I go back over things over and over again. And this is one of the important things I've learned over and over again in the Meyer material, the importance of clarifying, like love, like creation, like the spirit form, like reincarnation. And that's why I talk about these things over and over again. And it's very important because as you clarify your thoughts, You get rid of useless, negative, impure thoughts. They're eliminated. And you start to obtain space for useful, neutral, positive, equalized thoughts. And the prophet Emmanuel, one of the earlier incarnations of Edward Albert Meyer, said something very important. He says, everything within the human must die, but everything of creation within them must rise and embrace creation. So everything the humans possess has its origin in creation. So your spirit form is the part of you that's going to last. The material consciousness is just for this lifetime. It'll go into the subconscious. It'll be stored in the spirit form. It'll go into the universal or the planetary storage banks. So it's not lost. But the part that continues to really live is the spirit, the spiritual consciousness. So our consciousness is like a garden, and it needs to be correctly maintained. Our consciousness does. And if you feel yourself having wildly growing negative thoughts, tell yourself, I'm confident, I'm optimistic, I'm relaxed, I'm cheerful, I'm enthusiastic. It'll be hard for you, but repeat that 3 or 4 times. It'll help get your thoughts in the right, back into control, and think about something neutral. Think about this beautiful garden that you were in the other day, or the beautiful garden you have at home, or the trees you have at home, or think about a pet, or think about something neutral, something relaxing, something to get your mind off of these negative repeating thoughts. Because a person that's stuck in negative black thoughts, your perceptual ability will be very limited, and your world of thoughts will follow into a narrow framework of these negative perceptions. And it's all you can think about. You can't think of anything good. There's a gigantic universe out there. There's a gigantic world out there. But you can only focus on this one little area of your life, and you just rotate on it. And you almost get into a delusional state. And you can get impaired by this wrong perception. And so if you could be a genius and you could go into madness through the rotating of bad thoughts. And it says on page 26, whoever has negative thoughts will soon allow himself to be controlled by them. And that's a profound verse there. The might of the thoughts determines the state of the psyche, and self-evidently the mode in which the consciousness operates. Thus it happens that whoever, as a result of some sort of adverse circumstances, has negative thoughts, soon allows him or herself to be controlled by them, whereby the consciousness is negatively burdened and correspondingly also creates the same kind of thoughts, which allow their might to prevail and influence the psyche. So your thoughts still have power when they're negative. And they influence the psyche in a negative, damaging way, which in turn creates negative feelings. Remember, the feelings grow out of the thoughts, so you have bad thoughts, and then you have bad feelings. I always catch myself at the feeling stage. Usually it's like, oh, goodness, it has to advance to the feeling stage. Because I have the thought so quickly, the negative thought, I can't seem to stop it. But if I have the negative feeling, I identify that I'm thinking incorrectly. So the psyche, it gets into a negative damage state from the negative thoughts. And this creates a negative feeling, which in reciprocal action will reach the consciousness again and correspondingly influence more negative thoughts to be created. So the feelings also create thoughts. And this is the repeating vicious cycle. This comes into a vicious cycle, which brings about increasingly negative effects. They rotate. The thoughts create negative feelings, and the negative feelings also create negative thoughts, and it goes around and around and around. And exactly that is the point in the process in which the might of thoughts shows its control by releasing the thoughts. If the thoughts are nurtured, so you have to feed your good thoughts. When you're having good thoughts, you have to do the right things which help those good thoughts grow. You have to put yourself in the right situations. You have to have the right feelings. It is the nature of the thoughts that by their might alone, every conceivable thing can be brought to fruition. And it also says in the might of thoughts, develop the source of the life power, and you will create in you a life potential that you can depend on. So we are focused on creating the Lebenskraft in the German, or the life power, the life force, and we do that through neutral positive thinking, through repeating the good neutral positive thoughts. I am confident, I'm optimistic, I'm relaxed, I'm cheerful. We recognize the negative, but we're not overwhelmed by it. Also, the negative does not cause us to have negative thoughts. We know it's there. We recognize that the negative and the positive are two forces which belong together, and they depend on one another, and they should not be separated. If they're separated, they'll go into sartong. So focus on being confident, optimistic, relaxed, cheerful, persevere, persist, endure, and maintain your calmness. Otherwise, your thoughts will get stuck in an endless cycle, and you can become maniac. You can become a maniac because of the power of your own thoughts. And exactly that is the point in this process in which the might of the thought shows its control. If thoughts are nurtured and neutral, positive equalize. That's the key, getting yourself into the neutral positive thoughts again. We're all on this earth to evolve. That's why I have great confidence in you, because the creation has put you on here, on this earth to evolve. The purpose of your life is the evolution of your consciousness. We can have might over ourselves, and we can have might over our own destiny. We can win that by nurturing our good and healthy thoughts, by strengthening and clarifying our good and healthy thoughts. We become the Lord and Master of ourselves, of our life. Every human being who practices self-cognition, takes up self-examination, and lets self-control will start to know oneself and start to grow. That which the human being thinks he makes real, and that which the human thinks about himself, he or she. So we've been studying a wonderful book called The Might of Thoughts, written by a very, very important individual named Edward Albert Meyer, who lives in Switzerland, who has written over 50 books, who is now 81 years old, who has a spiritual consciousness that's 9.6 billion years old, who has been the prophets that we today call Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, Muhammad. He is teaching in these 50 books what's called the teaching of the Spirit, which will take about 800 years to catch on, but slowly, as our thoughts get more powerful, we can make the changes that are needed on this planet. I will talk to you probably, hopefully, tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye-bye.